By now we have seen that during the Reformation movement, there were several impacts on the society, the politics, as well as the various institutions like that of the church. But along with these changes, we have to remember that it was not just the structure of the society that was changing, it was also the ideological base of the society that was impacted. So we see in this age that there is an increase of the ideas of individualism and intellectual authority, right? But how exactly do we arrive upon that shift is something that we have to know through this very chapter. So here we see that the shift took place primarily due to the idea of secularism. Does this word look familiar to you? Right. So the word secularism, therefore, is something that we have heard of when we were studying the Constitution of India. In the Constitution of India, it mentions that India is a secular nation, that India allows, all sorts of ideologies, that there is no discrimination on the basis of religion. So this idea of secularism that we know about, the modern connotation of it, in fact, comes from the time of Renaissance and Reformation. These ideas were therefore built back in historical times. So secularism, which means no discrimination against anybody on the basis of religion, gave rise to the ideas of individualism and intellectualism. So the people were more focused on themselves as they got to know about different ideologies around them. So here you can see communitarianism, rightism, individualism, leftism, all these ideologies therefore were coming up at that point of time. So people were encountering not just the ideologies that they live with, but the ideologies that people were having, and there was a growth of it. Now all these changes were, as you know, were happening in the Renaissance and the Reformation phase, which ideally emphasized on the ideas of tolerance and rationalism. So of course we know that rationalism was the basis of Renaissance itself. So we see that spirit getting carried forward and molding the impacts of Reformation as well. So we see that Reformation movement itself helped in the growth of the reading culture and widespread education. So we see that these ideas of secularism, individualism, intellectualism, all these ideas were growing because of the growth of print culture. We have seen how the print culture gave access to the people to more works and books which they could read. So it was, these works and books were more accessible to people. So the more the people read, the more the people got to know about these various ideologies that promoted the atmosphere of education as well. So we see that people start reading about other religions, about other ideologies, and started to respect them, which gave rise to these secular ideas. Thus, secularism primarily promoted a sense of tolerance and respect, to respect other religions, to promote a healthy atmosphere that would tolerate these religions, were developed by the ideas of secularism. So we see that intellectualism and individualism therefore developed within people during this time in the society of Europe. through the events of Renaissance and Reformation. Because we have to understand that these two major events that were happening, as we have discussed earlier as well, that these acted as a watershed for the early modern history. So the ideas of early modern history, these societies that were built in early modern history, all can be traced back, as we know, in the age of Renaissance and Reformation. Now, we have continuously been discussing about the fact that all these ideas cannot be promoted if people do not read. And as we have seen earlier as well, that this was promoted, the growth of education was promoted because of the print culture that developed because of, the invention of the printing press. So, the growth of education that happened during that point of time was a major impact of Reformation. So we see that print is giving an access to knowledge to the common people, right? And the produced books which were being produced by the print were being used to educate students in schools and universities. So we see that a culture of universities is also growing. Thus we see the establishment of the famous universities of Cambridge, Oxford, Padua were all being established in this point of time. In these universities, therefore, we see that students are getting an amount of exposure, and this exposure through reading and that culture of reading that developed their sort of rational thinking as well, their intellectual thought as well. So intellectual thinking is promoted within them, is being developed through the methods of reading. Now, this was also the point of time, if we shift our focus a little into the political arena, we see that the absolutist monarchs who we have discussed about, the kings who were trying to gain more power, they were also growing at this point of time. Now, we have also discussed about the fact that the church had become very dominant on these rulers and kings on the way they administered. So, of course, the absolutist monarchs were now trying to sort of break away from the orthodoxy of the Catholic Church. So we see that not just the absolutist monarchs, but common people were also trying to find alternative forms of Christianity. So the the Catholic form of Christianity that existed at that point of time was not something that people were comfortable with anymore. So they started to find more alternative modes of it. This is the point of time when Calvinism, Lutheranism, and Protestantism grew as religious branches of Christianity that we have priorly discussed about. Thus, we see that these forms of Christianity that are emerging become much more appealing to the common people. The workers, traders, various merchants could carry on their work without any sort of restrictions that primarily the Catholic Church, the Catholic Christian Church had established. So we see that the workers, traders, and merchants become associated with these new forms of Christianity so that they could practice trade and commerce. So we can note this change especially in the working community, the community of merchants and traders, which promoted trade and commerce, of course, on their own terms. So there were no restrictions that these sort of branches imposed on them, which ultimately led to the development of economy because of the growth of trade and commerce. So, as we have discussed the fact that as university education was growing, We saw that people with great minds are also emerging who are trying to sort of change the economic structure or the idea behind the existing economic structure. So this was the point of time when people like Karl Marx and Max Weber established the concept of free market. So they emphasized on the concept of free market, and this fact actually arose because they were provided an amount of education in the universities. They got the exposure to deal with various ideologies, right? So individuals like Karl Marx and Max Weber wrote about the economic development that the Protestant ideology was providing. So the Protestant ideology basically was without any sort of restriction. So trade could happen without any restriction, that promoted the idea of free market. Now the idea of free market was also promoted vigorously by somebody called Adam Smith. Adam Smith was the first person to coin the term capitalism. So he was the one who stated about free market economy in his book, The Wealth of Nations. So you can see here the book, The Wealth of Nations, that is written by Adam Smith. Now he was one of the major proponents of capitalism. So he was one of the major supporters of the idea of capitalism and a capitalist economy. Now, Reformation, as Karl Marx and Max Weber also had stated, that it was the major driving force behind the economic development, which Adam Smith also noted. So can you tell me who was the writer of the book, The Wealth of Nations? Was it Karl Marx, Max Weber, Adam Smith, or Morris Dobb? That is right, it was Adam Smith. So Adam Smith not only mentioned about the free market trade policy, but also mentioned the term mercantilism. So he coined the term mercantilism. Now what is mercantilism? It is a theory propounded by Adam Smith in his book, The Wealth of Nations, that promotes the idea of free market and minimum interference of government in businesses. So we see that Adam Smith stating or talking about the policy of free market, so as less intervention from the government as possible, right? So private enterprises should function freely. So in this period of time, we not only find the proponents of capitalism and mercantilism, we also find people who brought forward the negative side of it, right? So Morris Dobb was one of them who established the negative side of this theory of mercantilism. He stated that the machinery was to accumulate wealth. So the machinery ideally focused on accumulating more wealth that would increase the divide between the rich and the poor. So the rich would become richer and the poor poorer, and the gap between them would increase. So Morris Dobb was the one who showed the negative side of mercantilism. Thus, as you saw, that these ideas that we live with today in the modern society, whether it is that of economy, politics, or in fact the societal structures, were all developed in this period of Reformation that ideally started with a simple religious change, a change in the religious structure, but ultimately it changed the structure of how the society was, leading it to the early modern period. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.